Welcome to the 4.9 notes. We are going to talk about polynomial inequalities in this lesson. And basically you're going to solve these like the same thing that you did in 4.6, which is really the same thing as 4.4. But instead of just having your answers, you're going to have to pick intervals on a number line. It's kind of like what we did actually in 3.10 at the very end of Unit 3, so it should seem somewhat familiar to you. Now, our whole goal is to solve each one and write our answer in interval notation. I'm just going to point out this part right over here that you might want to like highlight in your notes. You're going to pick the negatives if it is less than or equal to, and the positive is it's greater than or equal to. So first thing I need to do is list the zeros. Okay, so we're going to factor to find the zeros. The zeros are already basically here on this one. The first one is going to be -3/2. The second one is going to be 6, but it is a double. And the third one is going to be -5. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my number line and my y-axis, and I'm going to put points at 6, -5, and -3/2, which is -1.5. And I'm going to go ahead and solve this one by graphing it. If I'm graphing this one, there's no negative out here in front, so the right side is going to go up. All that I have to do is make sure that the one at +6 bounces because it's a double, which is my first one, so it goes right back up. Just kind of like that U-turn type thing. Goes through the next one, goes through the next one. And basically, I have a positive, a negative, a positive, a negative, because everything below like this is negative and everything on top is positive. Then I have to go back and reread my original problem. This was greater than or equal to 0, so I want my positives. So I want everything from over here, where it's positive, and over here. So it stays positive that whole time, which is everything to the left of -5. So -infinity to -5. Bracket, because it's a solid circle. And everything to the right of -3/2. So -3/2 to infinity. Now, if it had said just greater than 0, but it wasn't or equals to, that would mean that I would have to use parentheses instead. And, sorry, I forgot to put my U in between there, just realized that. I would have to count out the number 6 like this, because right here in the middle, I wouldn't be able to include that point because it's where it equals 0. And if it was less than 0 instead, I would want the negatives, which is everything below, so right here, between -5 and -3/2. So on that first one, I just asked a couple extras to get you used to the fact that you're just picking the intervals that are either positive or negative. And yeah, my graph looks extra funky now because I drew all over it. Okay, I'm going to do the same kind of thing on the next one and just kind of keep working through more of them so you can see as many as possible, because it really just helps to see more examples. just make sure you're remembering these rules over here about the brackets and the parentheses. That you're always using a parentheses around infinity symbols. You use parentheses around symbols that are either just, less than, or greater than, and you use brackets around it. The values of the symbols are less than or equal to or greater than or equal to. So on this next one, if I was solving each one of these equals 0, I would add the number to the other side, and I would get x squared equals 1 and x squared equals 4. Then I have to square root the whole thing. So I'm going to get plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2. They're not doubles, but there are going to be 2 answers for both of them. So I'm going to come over here, draw my little graph, put like 4 or 5 tick marks on both sides, and my points are going to be at 1 and negative 1, 2 and negative 2. Then, since there's no negative out here in front, my right side goes up, and none of these are doubles, so they're all going to go all the way through until I get to the next point. Kind of like you're sewing or something. Okay, so now I'm going to go through. This one's positive, this one's positive, and the one on the right is positive. But the 2 in between are both negative because that's where it goes below. And since this one is greater than 0, I want the positives. So I want these 3 intervals. Everything from negative infinity to negative 2, negative 1 to 1, and 2 to infinity. I'll go ahead and zoom in on that because it's kind of hard to see. Actually, I'll just pick a darker yellow. Negative infinity to negative 2, negative 1 to 1, and 2 to infinity. Because in between everything else, it went below, so it's negative. Which means my answers are going to be negative infinity to negative 2, parentheses, because it's not where it equals to, negative 1 to 1, and 2 to infinity. Now, I know that some people struggle with the interval part, so I'm going to go ahead and write this underneath my graph. This part is negative infinity to negative 2, negative 1 to 1, 2, and infinity. And I don't want these parts. I just want this, this, and this. Okay, third one. There is a negative in front of this one right here. I'm going to point that out now because it looks like I kind of covered it up. My zeros are going to be negative 2, 5, which is a double, and negative 4. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my graph. Draw about 5 tick marks on each side. And put points at negative 2, 5, and negative 4. Then, because of that negative in front, I'm going to make the right side go down. And it's going to bounce off of the first 0 because 5 is a double, and then cross through the next one, and then cross through the next one. Sometimes they're going to look kind of ugly like this. The intervals I have are from negative infinity to negative 4, negative 4 to negative 2, -2 to +5, and 5 to infinity. And I'm basically going to cross out the ones that I don't want. Okay, because I want the negatives this time. It's less than 0, so that means you want the negatives. We have negative, positive, negative, negative. Because the only time it goes above the x-axis is right here, so that's the only one that's positive. So if I want the negatives, I want this one, not this one, and this one. The only thing is, I'm using brackets since this is or equals to, but if I go from -2 to 5 and 5 to infinity, I don't have to keep this as two separate ones. I can combine that into just -2 to infinity. The only reason why I separate it like that is because if this was parentheses in between, I wouldn't be able to do that. So basically, I'm just condensing these two into this one right there. Let's try a couple more. So on the next one, you'll notice that there is an x to the 4th, which means we should get 4 answers. But when there's only 3 things, this is the one where you find the two numbers that multiply to -18 and add to -7. So -9 and +2. And when you split it up, instead of just x minus 9 and x plus 2, they both have to be squared. Otherwise, it wouldn't equal x to the 4th. That gives me answers of 3 and -3. And this one is going to be plus or minus I square roots of 2. Because you would subtract the 2 from the other side and you would get x squared equals -2. And the square root of -2 is plus or minus I square roots of 2. Now, because that one is imaginary, it's not going to show up on our number line. So we only really need to include 3 and -3. Since there is no negative out front, the right side's going to go up like this, all the way through, all the way through. So, kind of like our quadratics, we have got a positive, negative, positive situation. Okay, and my 3 intervals would be -infinity to 3, -3 to 3, and 3 to infinity. And since I want the negatives this time, because that's less than 0, I want this part right here, where the graph went below. Since that's negative, I just want -3 to 3 for my answers. Notice how I am using parentheses again, because it was just less than 0, not or equal to. Alright, let's do one more. On this next one, I notice that the last thing has an x, which means that my first step is to take out that x. Like so. And then I need two numbers that multiply to -3 and add to -2. That's going to be -3 and +1. So I have 3 answers, 0, 3, and -1. Going to go ahead and put those on my graph. 0, 3, -1. Again, there's no negative out front, so my right side is going to go up. And there's no double roots, so it's just going to follow all the way through all 3 of them. So it looks like I have a negative, a positive, a negative, and a positive. And the three intervals that this makes are negative infinity to negative 1, negative 1 to 0, 0 to 3, and 3 to infinity. Since this is less than 0, I want the negatives, which is going to be here and here. So negative infinity to negative 1, and 0 to 3. And technically, if I am using two intervals, I do need to put that u in between them like that. And that's my answer.